Renewed war in the Middle East has sparked college protests on campuses across the country and an alarming rise in anti Semitism. But the troubled history between anti Semitism and academia is not new. In the 19th and 20th centuries, quotas restricting Jewish enrollment were in place at several prestigious universities around the world. After the October 7th attacks, the Center for Jewish History in New York City opened an exhibition exploring that history between anti Semitism and activism. It offered a window into the experience of Jewish scholars and activists who were persecuted in Nazi Germany, with the goal of providing important context to the complexities that surround Jewish activism and culture on campus today. The exhibit prompted visitors to ask themselves, where do we draw the line between free speech and hate speech? We're digging into this question and a history that has so many parallels to the current events of today in this episode of Your Voice Matters.
Gavriel Rosenfeld, thanks so much for joining us. You recently had an exhibit at the Center for Jewish History about anti-Semitism and activism on college campuses, something that we are all very now aware of and familiar with. But walk me through, if you can, some of the history of how this, what we might have seen in the last year, year and a half, isn't the first time.
Right. So thanks for having me. This exhibit was prompted, of course, in large part by the campus protests that have erupted since October 7th, 2023. What we wanted to do at the center was to put the recent events in a larger historical context.
So give us an example for, take us back to a time when there were Jewish scholars who lived in Nazi Germany. I mean, what did they face?
Sure. So already in the late 1920s, there were Nazi student organizations that were harassing Jewish professors and Jewish students. That tradition of harassment, by the way, dated all the way back to the 19th century with anti-Semitic fraternities on,
Hmm.
co- on college campuses in Germany and Austria. But it really became an enormous problem after 1933 when the Nazis took power. And they actually implemented laws as early as April 1933 that kicked all Jewish faculty members out of their faculty positions, so that
Hmm.
by 1938 there were no Jewish faculty members on German college campuses. 20% of the entire faculty had basically been let go. The same holds true for Jewish college students in Germany.
Hmm.
And that was the immediate and very severe case of Germany. But of course, in the United States, at the exact same time, there's a similar phenomenon, albeit less defined by persecution, and that's the quota system that was implemented already in the mid 1920s. And that drastically reduced the number of both Jewish students and faculty on American college campuses, especially in the Ivy League. So that, for example, Columbia University in 1914 was about 40% Jewish. And after the mid 1920s, that had shrunk to about 14%. And if you go to places like Princeton, it was as low as 4%. And those quotas were not abolished until after World War II.
So, how did living through that inform or animate Jewish student organizations in the United States on college campuses? Was that something in the back of their mind, the front of their mind? Because they probably had immediate understanding of someone who'd gone through it.
Sure. So already in the 19th century, there are Jewish sororities and fraternities that are created in the United States of America, which was a sign, honestly, of Jewish assimilation and integration into the larger American educational sphere. Certainly by the 1920s and in the 1930s, when anti-Semitism really reaches, in the American context anyway, a new level of severity, there's an attempt by Jews to blend in as much as possible to reassure the larger non-Jewish community that they don't represent, say, a political threat by, supporting Bolshevism and the Soviet Union. And they tried to lie low as much as possible
Hmm.
through the 1930s, reassuring the larger American population that, say, when the drums of war started to get louder, and as FDR was mulling over intervening in World War II after 1939, a lot of American Jews said, don't do this on our behalf, even though we hate Nazi Germany. We don't want to be accused, as Charles Lindbergh famously accused Jews in 1941, of being warmongers, that were basically going to send American boys off to die while they remained safe.
Hmm. So, when you think about that, like the role of American Jews in advocating for perhaps their own community, but then automatically getting dragged into a much larger foreign policy conversation. That is also, you kind of see parallels here where you see a lot of the, I guess, nuance kind of being erased and just saying, well, you clearly must think X or Y because you're this ethnicity
Yeah, I
or
mean,
this
you're
race.
alluding, of course, here appropriately to the current crackdown on major private and public universities by the present administration, using the issue of putative anti-Semitism as the rationale. And of course, there's been on American college campuses a lot of anti-Semitic instances that do need to get addressed in a variety of ways. But if it's about cutting $600 million from campus X or $2 billion from Harvard, there should be a discussion about whether that is or isn't the best way to address these kinds of issues. But as you said, at least in this current moment, American Jews are at the center of this big, big debate about college campuses, about free speech versus hate speech, about wokeism, about so many things. I would like to think that our recent exhibit does thematize a lot of these issues. And if I could perhaps give you just one very
Sure.
revealing example. In 1933, in December, the Nazi ambassador to the United States, a man by the name of Hans Luther, was invited by the campus of Columbia University to give an address about Germany's new Nazi regime. There were massive protests outside of the speaking venue, right off Broadway, and certain journalists said these protests were a mistake because while the speaker was a Nazi, free speech in the United States is something that's sacrosanct and it has to be respected. By
Mm.
contrast, others said, no, you can't have a university, a place where there's the pursuit of truth animating its basic mission, being violated by somebody who is going to be spouting lies, and therefore his talk should be canceled. That's in 1933. We're really seeing the same kinds of issues playing out in our present day world. And it's, I think because most people in America haven't yet decided where the line is between free speech and hate speech. And it's a moving target, and obviously it's politicized as well.
Have there been any universities that have figured this out, or is there a path that we can kind of look to as a model, right? How do you balance what can be easily considered hate speech by some with the sort of absolutist definitions of free speech that some on campuses believe should be the case?
Yeah, it's a very, very vexing question. I mean, it really goes back to the famous case of the ACLU defending the American Nazi Party wanting to
Yeah.
march in the suburb of Skokie outside of Chicago back in 1978, and whether they should be allowed to do that or if marching in full Nazi uniforms and screaming death to the Jews, if that amounted to harassment. You know, the Supreme Court has come down time and time again in favor of free speech, but there are many instances, of course, recently where campus protesters went into campus buildings, libraries, disrupted students studying. And, you know, how universities can adjudicate that line is something that they're each doing on a case-by-case basis. But I will say many campuses have undertaken not only internal reviews of their own policies, they've also opened themselves up to external reviews. We internally here at the Center for Jewish History, in conjunction with Governor Kathy Hochul's office, as part of her anti-hate and education initiative, we've been trying to figure out what the best way is to alert students when they just first enroll in college as first-year students. You know, can they be told, if you want to engage in campus protests, here are the ways you have to do it. Know the rules in advance. A lot of times I think people simply don't know, and they think it's simply a free speech festival where everything is possible and there are no restrictions. There are other ways in which universities like Vanderbilt and Dartmouth have tried to organize special workshops on civil discourse to teach students and faculty, for that matter, how you should be able to see both sides of an issue and engage civilly with one another without having one side drown out the other and not allow them to speak. We may have to relearn some of these rules of engagement, but I think for the university as a place dedicated to the educational pursuit of truth, it should start there and then radiate outward to the rest of the country, to other institutions, if at all possible.
Gavriel Rosenfeld, the president of the Center for Jewish History in New York City. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.